An observation I've made about moralist arguments is that among social justice advocates, as well as their opposition, important practical reasons which would make or break an argument on their own are pushed to the side and ignored in order to give morality the spotlight, even if the debate is made pointless by the component that's been swept under the rug. Many of these arguments have a sort of elephant in the room, often ignored, even if it's vitally important to the morality part of the discussion people are fixated on. Having gone to one of these social justice colleges and been required to take social justice courses, I noted many of my peers were missing critical information that might otherwise seem mundane to outsiders. And it's interesting this isn't something people talk about very much. With morality and who's right or wrong being given the spotlight, things that seem more mundane but are still essential are overlooked. For example, if I were to grant most arguments made by a social justice warrior about wage gap as accurate and not misrepresented in any way, fully agreeing a female worker was paid 77 cents for every dollar earned by a man in identical positions and work experience at the most dramatic of estimates, the claim of sexism would still be invalid. Yet while I've heard countless wage gap debates, I've never seen the opposition that argue the wage gap is wrong or misinterpreted point this part out. Let's elaborate. The most viewed wage gap video I know of is the John Oliver spot with just under 2.8 million views. We'll play a clip.
In 2013, female staffers in the Obama White House were paid less than 88 cents for every dollar paid to male staffers.
Well, that's okay. Maybe that just means the president was 88% sincere when he talked about equal pay, which, if you round it up, is basically 100% anyway, so why is everyone complaining? And with that, all anyone could focus on was not how to fix this problem, but how to quantify it.
He goes on to showcase several interpretations of the wage gap from 81 cents, 88 cents, 9 cents, and 5 to 7 cents, and he frames the scenario as a math problem, while at the same time complaining people were not focusing on fixing the math problem, but instead on quantifying the math problem, claiming quantifying the math problem was a completely different direction from solving the math problem. Ridiculousness aside, a lot of people in the video's comments point out the wage gap numbers are misinterpreted, but I couldn't find a comment pointing out even if the worst estimates were represented with complete accuracy, the conclusion would still be invalid. Every wage gap argument I've heard claims that female workers should be paid the same hourly wage as male workers and aren't paid the same, which is therefore evidence of institutionalized gender discrimination, which is an oversimplification forwarded primarily by upper-middle-class privileged college students that have very little if any job experience and thus don't understand what compensation and payment even are. If they had work experience, they might have noticed that there are other things beyond hourly pay that go into a person's compensation, such as flexible hours, paid vacation time, sick days, etc. To fully measure how much a male employee was being compensated compared to a female employee, you'd need far more compensation information than their hourly pay, and even then the entire reason people have different benefits in the first place is because these items are valued subjectively depending on individual preferences, which makes objectively measuring a large-scale gap across millions of people rather difficult. The closest you could come is ascribing some sort of market value to the different types of compensation, which would be a much more honest framing of the debate, but it's not one I've seen any wage gap argument do, and even if they did, it'd still be subject to subjectivity discrepancies anyway. I see wage gap arguments all the time, but I've never seen anyone, even on the opposition, mention this underlying issue with the one exception of Honey Badger Radio. People seem to fixate on comparing and contrasting male to female employees to point out that there will be discrepancies, and in doing so overlook something critically important to what they're arguing over. Even if you only measured white men that all had the same education and experience over the course of thousands, there would still be discrepancies anyway due to individual preferences. To argue a wage discrepancy proves sexism requires the other compensations that aren't measured by hourly wage to have no impact, requiring them to be valued at zero, which is nothing short of ridiculous. I could grant every wage gap argument a social justice warrior could want, and their entire position would still be invalid because to view a difference in hourly pay as evidence of sexism, I'd need to believe other compensations did not add anything that could equate to monetary value to the compensation package, requiring compensation to be omitted as not compensation. These wage gap arguments are based on omitting information, and it's remarkable to me even the opposition don't point this out very often. Most of the opposition points I've heard note the arguments misinterpret critical information rather than noting they omit critical information and are completely invalidated if your goal is to use the studies to indicate sexism.
You've never experienced depression in your entire fucking life. Neither have I. You're fucking a white male!
Social justice advocates don't think of critically important hurdles like adding in some sort of market value to compensation packages to make their argument more credible or verify accuracy, because they're often privileged college students that have never had significant work experience, and they aren't aware of compensation other than hourly wage because that's not something they've encountered at any point in their lives. In order to be taught the social justice narrative in college, those courses that will be pushed onto you come at the cost of other courses you could be taking, and time spent being fitted with the social justice lens comes at cost of other information or skills the person could have developed instead. Combined with people selecting gender studies degrees and not being financially pressured to pick something with more earning power, many social justice advocates have extremely limited real-world skills and qualifications. I challenge you, the next time you're debating a social justice advocate, to attempt to steer the conversation away from the morality of who's morally right or morally wrong, and try to keep the conversation on a subject you might consider obvious or even mundane, like public health policy, or ask them how they'd structure a policy to get what they want. Then observe how disconnected from reality their expectations truly are, and how much they're missing information you might otherwise consider obvious. You'll likely discover the SJA to be missing critical information even if granted everything they asked for. I once had to explain to one that different blood types were actually a thing. The danger of regression is not confined to social regression, it's also public health regression, medical care regression, and so on, because the people pushing for related policies have no credentials, but have been too brainwashed with a state of self-righteousness to be aware their understanding is childlike and their knowledge, skills, and competence have been maimed to graft the social justice lens onto their bodies. I intend to go over the medical and child endangerment aspects of paternity fraud and public health regression and related subjects like predatory marriage contracts, etc. in the coming episodes. Thank you for watching, insert end of video pandering here, and I'll see you next time.